Okay guys, welcome back. Dr. H here for Octo Media. This is my second tutorial on basic orientation in Unity, the game engine. So you may remember from the first tutorial, we looked at movement orientation, we looked at the different W, E and R shortcut commands, and we dragged a first person controller in and played around with a couple of assets, most notably a floor, which we have now. So today we're going to take things a little bit further. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cube, and I'm going to use this cube to build a door frame and a door. So if I create the cube there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push F to frame in on the cube, and I'm going to lift the cube because the cube is exactly 1 by 1 by 1. I'm going to lift it 0.5 up through the y-axis, which immediately puts it flat on the plane like that. If I just roll back, this floor is a little bit small for what I'm going to do, so I'm going to make the floor a bit bigger. Instead of the plane being 1 by 1, I'm going to make a plane 5 by 5. Okay, it says 5 by 5 by 5. It isn't because it's got 0 effective thickness. So the first thing that's worth pointing out, Unity is not really a modeling program in the way that something like Blender or Maya is a modeling program, but you can use it to composite basic models, to use the box method it's called. And the reason it's called the box method is because you're essentially kind of boxing and bundling them all together. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a door frame. So I'm going to make this door frame, I'm going to shrink this down, I'm going to do it manually, I'm going to use the scale tool, I'm going to shrink it down in this dimension, shrink it down in this dimension, until I've got what could reasonably be assumed to be a beam, like so. And then I'm going to grow that beam. I want that beam to maybe be 2 meters tall, in which case I'm going to want it to be 1 meter off the floor, like so. So that's going to be my first upright. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that to create a second one. In order to duplicate it, you press Command D. Now, it looks like there's nothing else in the scene, but if you look in the hierarchy here, I've now got 2 cubes, cube and cube 1, and I could, of course, rename them if I was feeling diligent. You should rename them. Be diligent. But what I'm going to do, in order to get this cube away from the first one, I'm going to use the translate tool, W. You have to drag it out of itself. One of the first things I see when I do this with students is they duplicate things and they end up with, they say, sir, it's not working, it's not working. It is working, you've just got 7 cubes sitting on top of each other. Okay, so you've got to drag them out. Get rid of those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this about 1.5 meters away from the first door. And then I'm going to duplicate again, take this out. This is going to be my top beam. So now I'm going to switch into rotation. Important thing is worth knowing, if you hold Command on the Mac or Control on the PC, it will move through exactly 15-degree integers. So I can get that exactly 90 degrees. Well, pretty close to exact. So I'm going to move that up to the top, and I'm just going to shrink it down so that it actually fits my doorway. Okay, this isn't perfect, doesn't matter. Now what I've got now is I've got 3 things, and unfortunately I can still move each of them individually, which is not really what I want. What I want is to have one whole door, or one whole door frame in this case. There are 2 things I could do. I'm going to show you the first one first of all. If I grab these 2 uprights here, what I can do, if I hold Shift and click, I've got them both selected, I can drag them onto the top part, the upper part here. And what that does is it creates a parent-child relationship where these 2 are the children and this is the parent. Now the cool thing about that is the children will do whatever the parent does. So whilst I can still move the door stands individually, I can, if I select the parent, move the whole thing as one solid object. That's incredibly useful. Okay, so I've got my door frame now. What I want to do is I want to create a door. So I'm going to create another 3D object here. I'm going to create a basic cube. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit so it looks like it fits in the doorway. I'm going to grow it up like that. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but you kind of want it to feel as though it could swing within the door, like so, and expand it out like that. Lift it up and put it into place. Okay, so that's my door. Now what you'll notice is if I move this door round, it swings around the center of its axis, the y-axis. It's almost like someone stuck a pencil through the middle of it and they're kind of twirling it around. That's not much good for the kind of door that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a hinge. Now obviously if I was modeling this, I'd need to create a hinge at the top and a hinge at the bottom, and depending on the style of the door I might put these kind of metal stanchions across it. But I'm not going to do that here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a simple hinge by duplicating this here. Command D to duplicate. Take it out of the way. So I'm going to shrink this down because my hinge doesn't need to be nearly that size. And I'm going to move it back in here. And this is going to be my hinge. And what I'm going to do, just like I did with the uprights and the beam here, is I'm going to make the door the child of the hinge. So what you'll notice now, if I select the door or the hinge, is that the centre of gravity for the hinge is still the centre of the door. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here where it says centre and global, and I click on that, and it moves the centre over here to the pivot point. And now, if I move the hinge, the door opens up. And of course I can write a script to make that happen automatically, or to make it happen if I put the key in, or whatever else. So that's how parent-child relationships can be useful. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that hinge is a bit unsightly. I don't want it. So all I'm going to do over here on the hinge is I'm going to turn off the mesh renderer. That makes the hinge invisible. So the door still swings, but you can't see the hinge when you play. If I click play, go up to the door, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. No sign of the hinge there. And incidentally, that's how invisible walls are created in games. You create a cube, you make it the size and shape you want it, shrink it down, grow it like that, move it out of the way. I don't even have to put it on the ground level. And if I turn off the mesh renderer and try and walk into it, what I now have is an invisible wall, which is really annoying. See, can't actually go anywhere, invisible wall. So one other thing to talk about. Let's say that I've created an object, like a cube here, but what I've done, I've stretched it out for whatever reason, I've decided I want some kind of lean-to beam. So I'm going to put it at an angle, like that. And now I want to move it. At the moment, because my movement is set to global here, my movement axes, my translation axes, are always going to be to the core axis of the world. If I click on that, they become local. They become orientated to the object itself. And that's incredibly useful if you want to move things in a direction that might not necessarily be the direction of the world, up, down, or front. So that's just done with the local button up here. So something else I want to talk about. I want to talk about these colliders here. So colliders, as the name suggests, means that when you make contact with the object, you collide with it, you hit it, you bounce off. Now, in some cases, you might want that, but let's imagine we're making a simple collection game, and we're going to collect these spheres. And these spheres are going to bounce up and down, and we're going to collect them. And just for the sake of making them different from the world, I'm going to create a quick material here. I'm going to call my material red. Doesn't really matter what I call it, but I'm going to go up here and I'm going to change the color to red. And I just drag that material straight onto my ball there. And now I've got a red ball. So if I go up to collect that ball, it's got a collider on it. That's not much good because I'm bouncing off. And I don't want to bounce off. I want to collect it. So in order to collect it, what I need to do two things. The first thing I need to do is I need to make sure that this collider, and this one's got a sphere collider on it because it's a sphere. This one's got a box collider on it because it's a box. What I need to do is I need to make sure that this sphere collider is a trigger. Now that's step one. I can also edit the collider by making it slightly bigger than the object, which is usually a good idea because you might actually want some objects to be solid and still have colliders around them, as we'll get into in a moment. So now if I play and I go up to it, you'll see that it doesn't have a collider. It's still there. I'm moving straight through it. That's step one of being able to pick the object up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you step two. Step two involves a little bit of scripting. Now, if you're particularly daunted by scripting, if you've never done any scripting before, I taught myself scripting entirely from tutorials online like this and from books within 3 years. So if you want to learn some scripting, I'm going to show you how to do that now. If you don't, there's a link in the comments section of this video that you can skip to just putting the script on. And all the scripts are on my website. You can just copy and paste the script into the JavaScript here, save it, and it should work fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a JavaScript. Now I know some veterans might be thinking, why am I using JavaScript when I've got C#? C# is a much better scripting language than Java for object-oriented programming. It simply is. However, JavaScript is what I know. JavaScript works, and until they remove it from Unity, I'm going to keep using it because it's what I know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this script. And this script is quite simply going to be called collection. Now, in order for any script to work, you have to attach it to an object. This is object-oriented programming. The best way to do that is select the object and then drag the script down here to the inspector. You can drag it straight onto the object like I did with the red shader here, but the problem is if you muck it up, you accidentally drop it on the floor, you don't realise, then you start your game, and the first thing that happens is your player collects the floor, and then they fall through to infinity. So generally speaking, a good way to do it is to drag it onto the inspector of the object. Once you've got that, you can double click it and open it up. And this opens up MonoDevelop, which is Unity's own scripting program. We're not going to do any fancy schmancy scripting today. We're just going to do something really simple to keep it as simple as possible. So, one of the main things that you're going to be dealing with in scripting is functions. Functions tell the game what to do with information. So you've got function start and function update. We're going to get rid of these because we don't need them for this particular script. We're going to add another function. We're going to add a function called onTrigger enter. When you're putting your functions together, it's very important that the function bit is green. If it isn't green, it's not spelled properly. That you have capitals in the right places. So in this instance, O, T, and E are capital. And that you've got the brackets at the end. These brackets will become important later on as we add other statements to the function. But down here, we need these curly brackets. All functions take place within inside curly brackets. If you write outside the curly brackets, the game engine doesn't know what it's doing. So the simple thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say that when I make contact with that, so when I enter the trigger, that's what onTrigger enter does. When I enter the trigger that's around that, it's going to pick the object up. Now, unfortunately, Unity doesn't know what pick object up is, but it does know what destroy object is. So what's it going to destroy? It's going to destroy whatever this script has been put on. So it's going to destroy GameObject, the GameObject that's got this script on. Now I know that technically that's not the same as picking it up, but I'm sorry to break it to you, every time you've ever picked something up in a game, this is basically what's happened to it. It's been destroyed and it's been stored as something else. Okay, I'm going to save that with Command S, and now if I walk into the object, I should be able to pick it up. Step back, it's gone. See, it's out of my scene. I've walked into it, I've collected it. So if you're just joining us from the link and you haven't looked at the scripting tutorial, all you need to make sure that you've got is the sphere collider with the trigger checked as trigger, and that you've dragged the collection script onto it from the assets folder down below. So that last little thing I said I was going to show you. If you're wondering why my screen might look slightly different than yours, it's because my system just crashed and now I've had to put it back together again. So, important safety tip, always save your game. There's my save file, BE, this is what I've saved. Always save your game, save regularly. I've created a door here, it's parent and child as one. I've got the hinge here, it's kind of parent and child as one. But what if I want the whole of this thing to be one big object? Yeah, sure, I could kind of put the child, make the hinge the child of the door, but I don't want to do that because I don't want to forget that that's the lintel. In fact, if I rename it lintel, then I won't. That's the lintel of the door. So what I could do is I could create another object to hold them all in place. I'm going to create an empty game object. Creating an empty game object basically is something you could only do in a virtual system like this. I'm creating a point that exists in space. It's got relative dimensions. It exists at a certain space in the game engine, but it doesn't have any mass. It doesn't have any shape. It's completely invisible. It's basically nothing. I'm going to use this as the center point for my door. And this empty game object here, I'm going to call empty door. And what I'm then going to do, I'm going to make both of these children of the empty door. And then if I collapse that down, I've got one neat empty door that holds everything. That is GameObject create empty. So that brings us to the end of this object collision and triggers tutorial. What have we looked at today? We've looked at solid objects, we've looked at parent and child relationships, we've looked at hinges using the pivot and center options, we've looked at local and global movement, and we've done a little bit of scripting, and we've also thrown in a shader as a bonus. In the next tutorial, I'll be talking more about textures, terrain, and trees, and we'll get into shaders a lot more then. So for now, thank you very much for listening, and as always, hit subscribe for more tutorials.